Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You are joining us for an episode here of Friends of the Forest. I am your host, Sarah.
And I'm your other host, Brad.
And we decided to switch up the intro this week. So we are going full chaos mode.
Gotcha.
For this week's episode, we are finally chatting Mission to Disaster by Justina Ireland, which is the final book of the three that we typically get in a wave. Now I'm like really doing some on the spot thinking here. The final book of the three of phase 1 and of wave 3 of phase 1. It is the middle grade entry into this wave 3, and we are happy to talk about it this week. Glad it is finally here. The book's release has been a little funky, and we got a little bit behind, but we're really glad to be finally talking about this one.
We know it's not going to be a mission to disaster. Is this episode?
And
how many times can I use the air horn sounds on this episode? One more time.
I hope you don't edit the sound in and just keep our imitations of the sound.
Maybe I'll think about it. And for those who have already listened to the sounds, you will know I did not do that. So let's continue.
Oh, darn.
Alrighty. So before we get started, though, as is the case with every book review episode that we do here on the podcast, we have an independent bookstore of the week. So kick it off, Sarah.
All right. So our independent bookstore of the week, you were probably like, wow, we're jumping in real fast, but there's not a lot of news this week. The only real news we kind of covered on the Kenobi trailer reaction is that we know we're getting Celebration. It's actually happening. Tickets have already gone on sale. Del Rey is going to be there, and we're really excited. So that's all the news in a nutshell. So, okay, back to the bookstore of the week. Today's
Did you buy
bookstore,
anything in the Celebration store?
No, I might buy the logo pin, but I just haven't done it yet. You know?
Yeah. I bought the trio pin collection with Padme, Anakin, and Obi-Wan.
Of course.
I was like, if I'm going to buy any pins this year, it's going to be those three for Attack of the Clones. Yeah. So speaking of Attack of the Clones, we got some good stuff planned this next month.
Oh.
So get ready.
It's true.
Get ready. And if you want to stay up to date on what we got going on, make sure you're following us on all of our socials, including Instagram and Twitter. So please do that because you don't want to miss the stuff.
We've been talking about these plans for literal months now. So we're very excited to finally get going on them. So hopefully you will join us for our Attack of the Clones content coming up. We're very, very excited to revisit this movie that we both love. So anyway, that brings us to our independent bookstore of the week, getting all the way around back to the topic. And today's bookstore is a little bit different because since this is a children's book, technically as a middle grade, I wanted to choose a children's bookstore that specializes in selling children's books all the way from board books up through young adult. And this bookstore that I found is actually a brand new bookstore and is local to me in the Chicagoland area, which is very exciting. So my fellow Chicagoland listeners, if you have kids in your life or yourself that you want to go buy children's books for, this is a place to do it. And they are 3 Stories books. They are a children's bookstore in Lamont, Illinois. That is like the southwest-ish suburbs. And they are a new bookstore that was founded, I believe, in 2021. Yeah, 2021. So just the other day. And they're serving essentially Lamont, Lockport, Homer Glen, Palos Heights, Downers Grove, Naperville, Burr Ridge, Orland Park. You might know one of those areas. You might know all of those areas. You might know none of them, but that's about where the bookstore is. They believe in the magic of an imagination that books hold, and they offer story times, local authors, as well as non-book gifts for children that are probably quite bookish as well. So they've got books, toys, gifts, t-shirts, puzzles, and more. And I think it's really cool that I found them, not only because they're just, not quite down the road, but local to me that I can go visit them, which I hope to do soon, but also because they are a brand new bookstore. So if you've got kids in your life that you want to go get books for, think about supporting 3 Stories books. Probably the best way to get books from them right now is in person. So this is perhaps a little bit more limited than some of our other bookstores that I've featured. But if you are in the area, go visit it because the pictures on their website look very, very cute. And I think this is probably a wonderful place for children's literature. And that means their staff is really knowledgeable about children's literature specifically too, because that's what they specialize in. So that's it. 3 Stories Books, Lamont, Illinois, at 3storieslamont.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for giving us another indie bookstore to check out. And as I always say, better to support your local community and your local booksellers than it is to support giant corporations who don't need more tax breaks. So please go do that if you're able to, because it is well worth it. So with that being said, Sarah, we should just start to get right into the episode. So we're going to talk like non-spoiler thoughts kind of right up front, give you a little quick overview of our impressions of the book now that we've had a chance to read it. So did you want to start with how you felt about Mission to Disaster by Justina Ireland?
Sure. So this book overall, I think, is a lovely book. I think it's really suitable for the middle grade age range. And I love in this book that we have some of the returns of favorite characters that I loved from A Test of Courage.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I was so thrilled to see them. We'll talk more about it in a minute. But I think overall, this book isn't as memorable for me as some of the other books in the High Republic have been. And I think it suffers just a little bit from the fact that it acts more as a lead up to the events of the Fallen Star, as opposed to being like a full and complete emotional arc within itself. We do get some of those like emotional endpoints. However, there's a sense of like what's happening next at the end of this book that I wish we had gotten a little bit more of a conclusive factor on. That being said, I also understand like the odd position that this book is in because the events of the Fallen Star are incredibly depressing. And if I were writing a book for middle grade ages, I wouldn't want to focus on the events of the Fallen Star as the events of my book. So I totally get it. And I think that there is a lot of really great fun stuff to enjoy in this one. So overall, I have positive feelings. Wish it were a little bit more punchy, but I was really glad for some of the excellent moments that we got in this book.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much most of what you said. And I would say this book is in an interesting position because, it was originally supposed to be released in print form on January 4th alongside The Fallen Star. So I wonder how we feel. I wonder if you would feel differently having read this first in like a physical form before getting into The Fallen Star. Because like we both read Fallen Star like right off the bat.
Yeah.
But it did come out in ebook form and audiobook form on the day it was originally supposed to be released. So it was kind of this weird thing where I feel like the book got overlooked a little bit by some of the community. But yeah, overall, I feel like the book does what it needs to do for a middle grade. It presents a story and it's a conclusive story and it gives us some good character beats and some really good, emotional moments where the characters are dealing with their place in the galaxy and some of their insecurities that they're facing and overcoming some of those insecurities, which is exactly what you would expect out of this sort of genre. And it's Justina's return to middle grade after A Test of Courage, which I really loved. And Justina also did Out of the Shadows for YA, which is an amazing book. So I always appreciate Justina's her perspective that she brings to it and the things that she prefers to focus on. I think that's all great. And I'm excited to see where these characters sort of end up in the future of this initiative because they do some pretty interesting things in this book. And I want to see where that all ends up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that, these are some really exciting characters and we've really enjoyed following their story over this first phase of books. So I am very much looking forward to seeing where they go in phase 3, I assume, when we return to this time period. I want to touch on what you said about the January/March release. I do think that sort of oopsies, I don't really know what happened there. If the publisher failed to just change the date on the databases that would allow the book to be pushed back. Have no idea what happened there. But yeah, I think it dampened some of the buzz around the book because some people were reading it in January and then not talking about it. And some people were reading it in March in the print book and talking about it. But then those people from January weren't necessarily joining in the conversation. So I think it's been a bit uneven in its release. And I wish that this book had actually been released prior to The Fallen Star. I know that typically we have gotten the middle grade and the adult novel released on the same day, but I really wish that this one had the opportunity to really preempt The Fallen Star because of its lead up to the events of The Fallen Star. I think it would have been I think it would have been just a better continuity in the flow for this wave at the end of this phase. So I think that's complicated, and it's a bummer because I don't think this one ended up actually hitting the bestseller list, probably because of that sort of thing, where maybe some of the sales counted weirdly because of this situation. So I will say I have actually read the book twice. I read the book in print in January and then on audio in March. And I did really enjoy, well, in print, by in print, I mean ebook. I didn't get the book, 2 months early when they were having difficulties in supplying it. But the ebook is, I think, really energetically narrated. And the sound effects are really well done as well. And there was a moment like right in the beginning where I thought, oh, is this one going to be overproduced? And the answer is ultimately no, it is not. It's really free flowing throughout. It feels really nice. You're very immersed. And I think that the main narrator does a good job at capturing the spirit of the book. So this is definitely an audiobook that you could put in front of a middle grade reader, and they would enjoy because it has that sort of energy that is perfect for the middle grade category.
Yeah. And I will say too, like this book has some great characters in it. Even though we didn't necessarily feel as compelled by the sort of lead up story that we got, I think the characters themselves are so interesting and so complex and have like really unique traits that make them super memorable. So like ultimately when I read this book, even though it was a pretty straightforward, beginning to end plot, it's those moments with those characters like that where they shine that I took away. And that's kind of what most of what we're going to be talking about today are the characters and what they go through, and even some of the political scope of this book as well, because there are some politics involved, and that's all very interesting. So I'm very excited to dive into that, because you and I are suckers for politics in the High Republic.
Again, politics in the Star Wars. That brings us back to our Attack of the Clones coverage coming soon on Friends of the Force podcast.
Do it. Listen to us.
I guess with that Palpatine interjection here, that brings us to kind of the bulk of our conversation, which is going to be all about, as Brad said, these characters and some of the big ideas that are going on throughout this book. So where do you want to start, Brad? Full spoilers from here on out, just so you know, people. There's their warning.
Whether you read the book in January, February, or March, everybody read it differently. We are going to be talking about it. Or beyond. Yeah,
if you're listening to this podcast in the future.
Let's start with the return of some of our favorite characters. So we have Honesty Weft and Avon Starros, who were big standouts in A Test of Courage. I love both those characters. We missed Honesty from Wave 2 of Phase 1. People were like, where's he at? And you thought maybe he would appear in Out of the Shadows. Because Justina wrote that character originally. So I was very happy to see him return and to see Avon be such a focal point of this book. So yeah, we see the return of both these characters. And Avon is one of those characters who I have such an admiration for, because she's so like mechanically minded. She's really good at engineering. She can slice things. She knows how parts work. I feel like her and Ram would really get along well if they linked up. To solve a problem together, because his force powers and her brain could go far. So they can achieve anything. But I think it was really great though to see Justina continue to write these characters specifically, and to continue with Vern and Imri, and I appreciate that she has sort of captured their voice throughout each of the waves, and I'm excited to see maybe how some of Honesty's story and his knowledge of Dalna and all that factors into Phase 2, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what did you think of these two characters returning?
I think there was a group chat that I was in that had mentioned, oh yeah, I got to chapter 10 and was so excited to see that person show up. And I went, what's happening?
Luke Skywalker? He's in the book?
Skywalker? No. I'm like, has Honesty returned? Is Honesty back? I hope Honesty is back. And then Honesty returned, and I was like, that's my boy. I was so excited to see him because he's just a precious, good kid, and I really enjoyed his presence in A Test of Courage. So was so thrilled to get him back, and it made sense. It made like total sense that we would get him back, especially if we're arriving on Dalna, which is his home planet, as we know. So I loved that. And of course, having Avon back, not only as a supporting character, just as a part of the story, but as like one of the A plots. I would say there are like two dueling A plots in this book. Or maybe it's just the single A plot, because Vernestra and Imri are following Avon. Anyway, I'm not a writer. Having Avon be like a key character in this book was so exciting because we're also seeing her a little bit more grown up than we initially saw her because some time has passed since the beginning of the phase. So it was really, really lovely to get into her brain here, to hear more of her perspective, to see how spunky and she is, and to see really her mind at work, and to see how clever she is. So it was just a real thrill to get both of them back, and it felt like we were getting the gang back together from a test of courage, and I was glad to see it. And I seriously do hope we can see these characters, all of them, in phase 3, because Avon is such a strong character, and yes, she really is one of the smartest people in the whole dang galaxy at this point. So would love to see her be best friends with everybody, really.
You talk about Avon growing up, and part of me wonders, are we going to get another time jump for phase 3, like by a year, right? Because I think wave 2 to wave 3 was, or maybe wave 1 to wave 2, I think was like a couple months to a year from the Great Disaster to Valo. So I'm like, I don't want to keep watching my youngins grow up. I don't want to see them grow old too fast. You know, I want to watch them succeed. I want to watch them grow, and I want to watch them learn their lessons. And I think that's some of the joy of this book, is watching these characters deal with some of the typical problems that you face growing up. And Honesty is also a character that has definitely grown quite a bit as well, because last time we saw him, his dad had passed away aboard the Steady Wing, I believe it was called, because of a Nihil attack, and now he's with this girl named Shania, who they're sort of partners as part of their apprenticeship in the Corps, and they're learning together and growing together. And you know, Honesty kind of says at one point that towards the end of the book that he doesn't want to come back to Dalna, even if it's stabilized from all the volcanic activity, because he just hasn't felt it's been the same since his father passed. And that definitely hit for me, right? Because we talk a lot about the High Republic being about a group of largely younger Padawans who are growing in a world that is requiring them to grow very fast. Yeah. And so here you have Honesty saying goodbye to, you know, the only home he's ever known, and basically accepting that and understanding that it can never be the same because of what's happened, right? And so that is a very relatable feeling as somebody, for myself, who's moved a lot growing up. You know, you leave one place and you try to come back, and it's just not the same as when you left it. And so I definitely related to Honesty in that way, you know, coming back to an environment that you want to be like, feel like you're at home, but something's off and you just can't quite put your finger on it. And then once you do, you realize you should move on. And so I thought that was really interesting to hear for his story. And, you know, he mentions maybe joining the Santeca clan, but also offers to Vern that he can help her in the future if needed. So I think that's definitely leaving the door open for him coming back. And I'm excited to see how much he matures and being off on his own and truly leaving the Dalnan nest.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that we've gotten to watch them grow over this time, as you mentioned earlier, because part of me wants to be like, no, don't grow up too fast, slow down. Like, I want to see each day and the ways that you're growing. Yeah. But we've really only seen these characters 2 to 3 times.
What are you talking about? I've known them for 10 years.
I know.
10 to 15 years of my life.
But it's not true. You haven't. You've known them for 1 calendar year. And in that time, they've grown more than 1 calendar year, essentially, it seems. It's and crazy. Part of me wants to watch them grow at a slower pace so I can just like know them better. But it also presents this really exciting opportunity over time to give them new challenges as they grow older, and for them to kind of ask new questions or explore problems in new ways. And I really think we see that with both Honesty as he comes back to Dalna and ultimately realizes that that place isn't his place anymore, and, you know, is going to go on this new path. But also, it's really exciting to see Avon challenge these new questions, because in a lot of ways, her personality has stayed the same. She's a fighter. She's someone who's tenacious. She's someone who's smart and who will apply herself at every turn. But you also see her having to wrestle with a different calculation for herself and the other kids that she's stuck with. And there's this great sentence pretty early on where it says, Avon has had an 87.3% rate of success when it comes to hijinks and varying shenanigans. And I think that's just like a really great summary of who she is because, you know, she's smart, she's capable, and she also likes to mess around a little bit and be a little silly in her trial. She doesn't take herself too seriously, even though her work is often serious. And in this sort of environment that she's in, she is getting to the place where she wants to be, like, academically. She's working with Professor Glenna Kipp on these crystals, and she's about to be able to get somewhere, you know, and actually do something exciting, but the crystals. And then she is kidnapped. But let's be clear. This is now the second time that Avon Starros has been kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
Justina, what the heck? That's a lot of times for a child. That's 2 times more than any child needs to be kidnapped in their lifetime.
I think we should be blaming? We should be blaming Gira Starros here because
you're actually right.
Gira is like in cahoots with the Nihil.
She's a complicated figure.
She is.
We can talk about her more in a minute, but Avon being kidnapped twice is a lot of times, and I think also tells you something about Avon, that she's smart enough and like savvy enough to and just lucky enough to get out of both of these situations alive. And so the Nihil kidnaps her this time, and immediately she's put in this group with the other kids whose names are Kryland, Petri, and Liam, who are other kidnapped children. But immediately once she's kidnapped, she goes, okay, how can we get out of here? How can I get out of here? If I get out of here and send a communication to J6, then like J6 can come and get me. If I can get out of here and be able to fix up this little game console that they give me, then I can be able to send a communication. She's constantly trying to think of new ways that she can not only help herself, but help others, those that she's in the same situation with. So I think it's really interesting that she continues to go for it during this book.
Yeah, and it presents a unique situation for her because she is being used for her abilities, and that's why she's chosen amongst the other kids to sort of help Dr. Kempa. And it presents a situation for her where she feels at fault for everything that happens later in the book, between the Dalnin fault break causing a bunch of volcanic eruptions and the fact that she stole Imri's Kyber crystal and she's got to apologize to him later on. So she kind of feels all this guilt, and maybe some of it is from built up from her past as well, from being kidnapped the first time. I think she felt a little guilty about that as well, and what it meant for her mother's reputation and how her mom felt about that when she realized what had happened. So a lot of guilt building up for her, but I think in the end she sort of comes to terms with it and is comfortable enough to move forward. And I think we could maybe talk about the apology to Imri, because I think that's a big learning lesson for her.
So the apology is really interesting because it comes at the end of the book, and like right at the end of the book. And I believe it's Vernestra who encourages Avon to apologize for stealing the crystal. And there's this great line where it says, Avon never liked apologizing, but she immediately felt better after she had handed him the crystal. And then she realizes that Imri was like soothing her through the forest, and she's like, come on. And, they kick J6 out. And Imri's like, Avon, I already knew that you did this. And she's like, you did? And she's like, who else would it have gone to? Like, where would it have gone? Who would have taken it? Who would have been interested in that? And Imri says, I guess I figured that it was in good hands. You're the smartest person I've ever met, Avon. If someone could figure out what or how to use a kyber for more than just lightsabers, some kind of thing that could help lots of people, it would be you. And says, this is on 258, that made Avon feel like crying all over again. And Imri goes, I'm not mad. We're all good. Don't worry about it. Hey, do you want to tour the Halcyon with me? And so then you get the kind of twist around like, hey, it's okay. Like, we don't even need to spend time on this because I trusted you to do the right thing here. And I think that really allows Avon to, when she starts to cry again, I think she's processing her own guilt. Like, oh, I didn't need to feel guilty about this. I could have avoided that guilt if I had just said something. But also, I'm really touched by my friend's trust in me and my friend's belief in me that I'm destined for something great. And I think that's a really powerful and lovely thing here. And I'm I like that Avon kind of learns these lessons all at once.
Yeah, it says it's okay to apologize, right? Like it's okay to confront those things and to own up to your mistakes, especially, right? And when we talk about the middle grade genre, that's like an important lesson to teach.
Yeah, and not only to own up for your mistakes, but also to recognize that you didn't need to harbor all of this shame and guilt about it in the first place. Because, you know, if she had spoken up about it earlier, she could have gotten that affirmation from Imri earlier. And that might have changed something for her for the better. But I also just think it's wonderful how strong their friendship is, and that Imri is kind of touched in a way that she kind of took it, and that he knew that she would use it for something good. And I think that sort of belief in someone else is really powerful. Speaking of kyber crystals, I think we should talk more about Avon's time with the Nihil and her production of flawed crystals with Dr. Nkempa, because we kind of learned something at the end of this book that kind of makes the rest of the book feel just a little bit more interesting here. And I don't want to, spend too much time on it, because we'll talk more about like the Nihil as the Nihil a little bit later. But we learn that Gira knows who Dr. Nkempa is, and therefore kind of knows that Dr. Nkempa was the one that she was working under during her time of, I guess, imprisonment by the Nihil. Mm-hmm. And Avon is like, did you tell her this? And everybody else is like, no. She goes, well, I didn't tell her this either. Interesting. And you as a reader go, light bulb.
Interesting.
Light bulb. Uh-oh, spaghetti.
How did she know that?
How does she know that? But that makes it really an interesting kind of position, because we know that Avon ended up with Dr. Nkempa after, I believe it was Devalampab, like gave them an old game. And Avon was like, oh, look, we don't need to just play this game. We can take all of its component parts out and put them together in this new way in order to help us escape. And she gets out. So she opens the door, she gets out. And there's Devalampab like, I knew you were smart enough to figure this out. But also, like, how did Devalampab know to think about and do this? Had they been in communication with Gira Starros the whole time? Because there has to be some sort of communication to understand that Avon is, quote unquote, safe within the Nihil. Like she's not at risk of being sold to the Zygerians, whereas like the other kids perhaps actually are, because they don't have a powerful senator mother who's aligned with the bad guys.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting thing. So she ends up doing the same kind of sort of work that she did with Dr. Kip in producing these kyber crystals, and using her knowledge base to do this, for the Nihil. And she goes, I'm not actually going to help them. I'm going to hurt them by producing these flawed crystals that are going to break apart when they're used. What did you think about that decision from Avon? And like, what did you think about her involvement with Dr. Nkempa?
It was very smart of her to recognize what was happening and try to, it was very Galen Erso of her. A flaw so small that they wouldn't notice, right?
Dr. Nkempa also probably should have noticed the fact that like these crystals were not as solid as they should have been, if she's so smart with crystals. But anyways though, but I think in a way Avon is smart enough to use Dr. Nkempa's own overconfidence against her, right? Because at one point when Avon really wants to set her plan into motion, she's like, hey, like, wouldn't it be great if we could put this thing on display and all the other Nihil who have doubted you kind of see what they should have believed in from the start, and that you're the best and all this other stuff. And she's like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. And that's when all the shit hits the fan, right? Because she goes to test the crystals, and the crystals work their doomsday magic. But again, that feeds into Avon's guilt that, she sort of causes this chain reaction on Donna, because we know it's a very young planet with a very active volcano system. And the Nihil purposely set this stuff up, these obelisks up on that fault line in order to terraform the planet and cause as much chaos as possible, right?
it's one of those things where it's like she's like, I came up with a smart idea and like look what it led to. And again, I don't think that's her fault at all. She did what she had to do with the resources that were given to her, and she used her situation to her advantage. She kind of had an in with the Nihil, and she had her whole laboratory at her disposal. But it also makes me think, though, just speaking of mothers in the High Republic being a part of the bad guys, I wonder if Avon and Silvestri will ever cross paths. She's like, oh, your mom also was in the Nihil? My mom too. Oh my God. Like, I want them to bond over that a little bit and see maybe if they can have a heart to heart and coping with that reality, because I think they could learn a lot from each other. But I do want to make note of one comment early on in the book when she's studying the crystals at Port Halep, and she's wondering if kyber crystals could be used for more applications by harnessing some of the radiation and ambient energy of space to become more powerful. And it says, quote, with so much random radiation, the like just floating around, could they somehow duplicate the kyber structure to direct that energy to power entire planets? And here I am going, did Avon just invent the Death Star? Speaking of Galen Erso,
she like invented the opposite Death Star.
She invented like the Life Star here.
The Life Star.
What if instead of blowing up planets, we powered them? She's like, let's do it. And she seems so eco-friendly here, because she's like, I want to take Tabana gas and I want to make it more efficient. We got to replace fuel. Like, we love eco-friendly Avon Starros. We love it.
We do. A real queen.
She's got to create the Life Star at some point, I think.
The Life Star. I support that.
Create the Life Star.
I support that. And I guess we also don't actually know if there are any planets that are doing this, perhaps. Like, I think it's plausible that this ultimately has happened between the time we're reading about and the time of episode 9, or that they're researching this. Like, I don't think this is actually that far off in terms of potential ability.
Well, and Starkiller Base takes energy in and spits it out. It's interesting.
And that's a planet.
That's a planet, yeah.
R.I.P.
That is kind of a planet that is powered. Although I don't know if it used kyber crystal, right? Well, it's Ilum, so it's full of kyber, yeah.
Yeah.
So rest in peace, Ilum.
Yeah. Yikes.
Rest in peace.
What are the Jedi gonna do now, Rey? What are you gonna do, man, my friend? Yeah, I think that's all very interesting, and we love little nods to other things in canon, and that was a great little nod. Do you have anything, more to conclude our conversation on like Avon's ingenuity and just how wonderful of a character she is? Because I think I could go on and on in circles about how great I just think she is.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're talking a lot about the Nihil and how they captured Avon. So let's sort of transition into what they've been up to, and a big revelation that this book gave us, which is that the Nihil are kidnapping children, and they either want to force those children to become Nihil themselves, and if they refuse, they will be sold to Zygerian slavers, which not great. It's not great. And this is an issue that's definitely been tackled across Star Wars, whether it is people being sold into Zygerian servitude, which we know that Lorna D from Tempest Runner was sold to the Zygerians. We know that stormtroopers in the sequel trilogy, they were brain scalped, and they were children that were kidnapped to become stormtroopers as part of the First Order and sort of indoctrinated that way, which I wish that story would have had more of a
more teeth,
of a a little bit more pull to it, because I think that was really compelling stuff. But I love that it's being presented in the High Republic, which we also see with Affy Hollow and the Bind Guild, how the Bind Guild was indenturing people to do work for them. Right. So that's all interesting how this keeps popping up. And this really, you get an inside look as to what happens when you do get kidnapped and you're forced to make that choice of, do I help the Nihil or do I get sold into something that is even possibly worse than serving the Nihil? It's a tough choice. And Avon is strong to make that choice, despite little to no information about her circumstances. And if there is a Jedi on the way to help her.
Yeah, I do think this is I kind of want to take it back and talk about the central question or the central idea that's happening here, and that the Nihil not known to be kidnappers of people at all, are now not just kidnapping people, but they're kidnapping children, the most vulnerable among us, the most impressionable among us, with the end goal of them either like being forced into work with the Nihil, which is essentially slavery. They're not choosing this path from themselves, or being sold as slaves to the Zygerians. Their choice is an impossible one. Either they help terrible people do terrible things, or, they have no, maybe they're hardly given living conditions if they're sold to Zygerians. Like that's a completely unknown to them. And so like this is truly an impossible situation. And if you're a bad guy, also a great way to bring people over to your side with the idea of building up the next generation of people as well, right? Like, because if you're grabbing children, that child is going to have 40, 50, 60 years, that they're not going to be able to get out of this, oppressive situation. If you're a bad guy, that's a great option for you. But it is a terrible option if you are just not the bad guys, if you're literally anyone else. Mm-hmm. And it's an awful, awful thing. So it's fascinating that even in the book, I think somebody mentions, oh, that's an odd thing for the Nihil to be doing. They're not known to do that, but that's clearly changed with maybe because their numbers are dwindling, maybe because they see that they need to keep everybody in check, and also to create this cycle of fear that the Nihil want everybody to live under. And so it's a powerful tool, and it's clearly working on the Dalnans, who are then keeping quiet about the situation, which helps literally no one. But yeah, we've talked about slavery and indentured servitude on past Star Wars conversations, specifically around Claudia's work. And this is something that's really interesting because you go back to the prequels, and Qui-Gon essentially says, we're not here to free the slaves. And when he gets Anakin, he doesn't take Shmi with him, because he's like, he's going to train as a Jedi. Therefore we, have to leave the family. But like, he doesn't really free her. And ultimately, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Qui-Gon leave Tatooine and leave the situation with still this culture of enslavement on the planet. And it's really not as dressed as it should be within that sort of situation, within that film and within that storyline. And I do think that Claudia has really worked to kind of fill the gap between bringing up the topic of slavery or indentured servitude and then actually addressing it and talking about it as a bad thing and working to rectify it. We really see that with Master and Apprentice, with Pax and Rahara and that whole storyline. And then we see it again in Into the Dark, as you mentioned, with the Bind Guild and with Affie Hollow and what she does to take action against Scover and the Bind Guild as a whole. And I think it's been really valuable for Claudia to tackle this because it does bring up these really great conversations within Star Wars. And this book, I don't think does as much to talk about tackling that conversation. But I think it's also worth mentioning that this is a middle grade novel, whereas the others have been YA and adult level novels. So there's a bit of a different audience, a different scale, and a different focus for these books, where while this issue is coming up and while the Jedi ultimately do help many of the children that are harmed by the Nihil here, it's not an idea that is like explicitly interrogated, although it's like universally acknowledged as bad. Yeah. By our characters. And so it's really interesting that it returns here. And it's also interesting, and I don't know what it says like about the Nihil other than like, oh, they really, really suck. Right. But it's a fascinating topic to have appear in this space.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point about the genre does matter. I don't necessarily think this book had to dive into it any more than it did, right? Because it does still present the conditions and the reality for Avon of like what's going to happen to those other kids, and that kind of settles in, right? So like that emotion that she's feeling is almost all we need to know. However, I do wonder, by Justina including this in the book, like what is this going to set up for future books? Yeah, for sure. How are the Jedi going to address slavery and indentured servitude when it's being done by their enemies that they're fighting constantly, right? Whereas in the prequel trilogy, slavery is happening on Tatooine, like we're not in like fighting with the Hutts. That's not our opponent. So we're going to like let it slide. Right.
Yeah,
so like what's going to happen now that it's like, oh, our enemies are doing this, it's like, and that really brings up a whole new issue of like the Jedi are maybe only fighting these issues when it's convenient for them. And they're very selective about when they address these issues. Right. So like what happens between the High Republic and the prequel trilogy for them to sort of start turning a blind eye to those things. And again, we haven't seen how they're going to address this or if Vernestra is going to tell them about what's happening. And we don't know all the ramifications just yet, but it's going to present a really interesting problem. And I'm curious as to how the Jedi are going to react, if they're going to be the Jedi of the prequel trilogy and not think about it. Or if they're going to tackle it head on and make sure that the Jedi are trying to prevent this as much as possible, because like you said, fear is a powerful motivator, and war is a lot of times a numbers game. So if the Nihil can get the numbers, and they just keep growing and growing and growing, what's to stop them? And even Vernestra wonders, like, if the Dahlin officials have turned a blind eye to this and haven't really said much, how many other planets are sheltering the Nihil out of fear and letting them take their children away? Right. Yeah. So it's a very, very scary issue to be realizing is happening. And yeah, the Nihil are really much worse than we probably thought. And I think there's a lot of internal strife happening between different tempests, right? Because are other tempests doing this, or is it just Cara Zoo? Right? We don't know.
Yeah. Does it come down from the top, or is it just one faction? Either way, it's pretty dang bad.
It's terrible. Yeah.
Like it's really bad. And I do want to say, like, I think it's not only the Jedi who have this responsibility to help in these sort of situations, but the Republic as well.
Oh, yeah.
You go back to Into the Dark, and when Affy reported the situation with the Bind Guild to the Republic responded within the day. You go from that sort of efficiency, that sort of level of care for these sort of situations to this, we're not here to free the slaves, so we're just not going to do anything about it. Sort of a deal of the Phantom Menace. It's a really, really dramatic, drastic turn. So, I mean, I think you really bring up a fascinating conversation is this something that the Jedi and the Republic are going to tackle? Is this something that they're going to say, oh, this is bad? Yet when it happens on their soil later down the road, they're just going to, turn a blind eye and look around and go, what? And I do think that says something about, our real world politics and real world situations where you can see it happening right now with like the war in Ukraine. Oh my gosh, war, so bad. These things that are happening to civilians, so bad. And they are so bad. The things that are happening are like beyond comprehension, I think, for so many of us. And at the same time, these things have been happening our entire lifetimes in different parts of the world that we just pay less attention to as a country, as a society, in news media, because we see the other situations as other, not us, them. And that's so flawed. But also at the same time as that's happening, there are terrible things happening on our soil here in the US that we just literally do not put much attention to. Things that are happening at the border, things that are happening in prisons and jails to people. So it's a very kind of extended length kind of commentary on a very, very big picture political idea, which I think is really fascinating to bring up here if you're able to make those connections from this book to where we are in 200 years. Again, just like a really fascinating conversation that I am grateful, I guess, that Star Wars has continued to have in its publishing sphere. And I hope that we continue to like dive into the political, social ideas here and the ways that the Republic is an active member in stopping it or is complicit in allowing it to continue by their inaction. So, yeah.
Yeah. And, speaking of the Nihil too, now let's talk about the big three villains in this book, who are all, Saoirse Ronan voice, women.
And I think that this really is saying that, like, hey, women have every ability to be as awful as male villains have always been. And I think we often see villainy or badness as masculine or male coded oftentimes. And the way that women are often coded as villains is like often very like seductively, like, oh, they're seductive. Think of a character like Poison Ivy, who uses her charm, her sultriness to to lure others in. And that's often how we see women villains. And I'm glad, that we get 3 women villains that are different from one another, that are powerful in their own ways, in ways that are like not necessarily coded as masculine or feminine, and have individual stories to tell. And I think the differences between somebody like Karazu and Dr. Nkempa are really interesting because, Karazu is a leader. Dr. Nkempa is there because she's like, yeah, they gave me the opportunity to do this and I love this power and it's very interesting to me. So, and then you have Deva Lampam who like will eat you.
Please.
Which is something else entirely. And also her species lives a really long time, as we have learned, because she shows up in a comic, 250 years down the line.
Yeah. Introduced before this book by Justina's comic, specifically War of the Bounty Hunters. So that was really, I was like, oh my God, Justina, what a power play right there.
And she's got rainbow feather hair.
Yeah, she's freaking awesome. I was like, she should show up in Book of Boba Fett. Lo and behold, she didn't, but she showed up in the High Republic. So I will take it where I can get it.
So what did you think of this trio together? And how did you think these villains, perhaps all being women, does that mean anything to you? Did you have anything to like, oh, that reminded me of this, or that made me think of something else?
I think they're all great. I think that, like what they do is not great, but as villains, I think they're great. They're great villains because, Karazu, it's interesting because she's filling the void left behind by Predator. And, she and Panetta filled the void of Kassav. So I'm wondering if Kara is going to live that much longer, because it seems like that spot has a lot of has a big turnover rate.
Yeah, it doesn't go so well for them generally.
Doesn't go so well, yeah. But, between her and Lorna D, women, they're starting to lead the Nihil a little bit. Martian's going to have to watch himself because these are really powerful people who will go to great lengths to try to overthrow the Eye. And, we see that with Lorna, and I kind of get the sense that Kara is not going to be messed around with. And, Dr. Nkempa is obviously somebody who really prides herself on her knowledge. And, we learn a little bit of backstory about how she used to be this munitions expert and what she calls quote unquote beautiful civil war on Soika that gave scientists an opportunity to experiment. And she was a part of that. And
she's like messed up.
Yeah, like the fact that she sees that war as beautiful says a lot about her character. And even though the war died off when the Republic intervened, she didn't pursue academia because she's like, what I want to do is not, it's not kosher in academia. It's like, that's kind of terrifying. That's really scary. But, I think it's sort of interesting to get this type of mad scientist character. And the Nihil are really leveraging some of those people, right? I mean, you have Chansey Yarrow, who is a scientist as well, who studied hyperspace, right? And the Nihil brought her aboard, and Dr. Udersand, another scientist. So they have like really powerful people who are a part of the Nihil, and it's no wonder that they keep outsmarting the Jedi and the Republic, because these people that are the smartest of the group are often the ones that were outcast by the Republic because of their studies and all this other stuff that was going on, right? So it's really fascinating. And then, like Deva Lampamp being somebody who was previously introduced in Empire Strikes Back era storytelling, and seeing her here is really, really cool. And I love that we know what she looks like. I hope we get some character art of her like in the High Republic era, because obviously there's plenty of her now, but I want to see what she looked like then. Is it that much different?
I will say that, like, by mentioning these like trio of women villains, that did not mean to erase Lorna D from this conversation, because like, oh my God, Lorna D, like, holy goodness, Lorna D, she's an incredible villain. But I think we know when we see women villains, they're often alone. And we, for the longest time throughout this phase, saw her alone amongst Panetta, Kassav, Martian Rowe, and all the power players, right? So for her now to have the company, in terms of position, status, and villainy of Karazu, Deva, and Dr. Nkempa is just a really sort of interesting turn in the gender balance of power of the Nihil.
Especially when you consider Marie Santeca as a woman, and she held the paths.
Well, she held the paths, but she was also not evil.
Right.
You know, like,
but the fact that, you know, the men of the Nile are building upon the success of women who are behind the scenes, right? And even Asghar Rowe killing his own mom, who was sort of the head honcho.
Anyway, seems like there's some very patriarchal, oppressive qualities to the Nile system.
Seems like it.
You know, I appreciate the girl bossing of my girls, Lorna T, Kara Zoo.
Part of me is like, Kara, Lorna, overthrow it all, burn it all down to the ground.
You know, and I mean, I have to joke because they are just like girl bossing too close to the sun. They are terrible people. But I do think it's interesting that we are kind of getting a displacement in the known gendered politics of the Nile. And I'm not seeing like, a win for equality, because like they're still awful, but it is interesting to see different representations of women throughout fiction. Like, some representations have to be good, some representations have to be bad in order for there to be authentic representations of people. You know?
No, I absolutely. I totally agree.
So anyway, Gira Starros, another complicated lady.
Well, you know what else is complicated? The relationship between Dalna and the Jedi, because it is a storied one. It is one that goes back centuries. You know, you could say it is one that goes back 150 years. Where have we heard that number before? I
wonder. I don't think I've actually ever heard that number before. It's the first time I've ever hearing.
Interesting. It's not like Phase 2 is going back 150 years in the past. Oh, wait, it is. It is. All right, let's talk about Dalna. Because this is really, I think, where the politics shines quite a bit, but not enough, because there's still so much secrecy about what happened between Dalna and the Jedi. Like, what went wrong? The Jalnan Temple was built 150 years ago in the aftermath of a devastating battle on the planet. So this devastating battle that occurred is apparently called the Night of Sorrow, which is what Honesty called it. And even though Shania says it's not supposed to be talked about, you know, it's not good to speak of the dead, Honesty opens up a little bit about it, and it says it was a point in time where the Republic answered a call for help when Dalna was newly settled, and there was quote unquote confusion that led to the death of many people. And a lot of people still blame the Jedi for what had happened during the Night of Sorrow. The timeline seems to be Night of Sorrow happens, a lot of bad stuff happens, people die, and then the Dalnans and the Jedi then sort of split off from each other. The Jedi are maybe in the midst of or finalizing their temple, so they still keep it, but the Dalnans hold that distrust and they become standoffish and say, you know, keep where you are, don't interfere with our stuff, we'll let you stay here, but like stick to your lane, basically. What do you make of this history? And do you think this is going to be explored in any capacity as part of Phase 2?
Well, firstly, I will answer that second question. And I just have to contradict you in order to win the bet. And I'm just going to say no, just for fun. And I'm probably wrong. But I think they might not talk about this in the second phase. And I might be eating my words in 5 or 6 or 8 months. I don't know how long it is from now until then.
You will.
But I just have to say no on principle. I have to say no on principle, but probably yes. But what do I think about this? I think this is really, really interesting because I think it says a couple of things. And I think the first thing that it says is that there was a lack of proper communication and resolution after this event happened. That maybe the Republic just left and maybe they didn't actually come to any sort of understanding about what happened. Maybe the Republic never took responsibility for what happened. And maybe they did, but maybe the Dalnans were still distrustful, which would be entirely fair. But it makes me feel like there was never like an actual, they said, okay, event over, you know, wipe our hands clean, let's go.
Especially after rushing into it, maybe with some incomplete information, right? And leaving a devastation in their path.
And I think that's all makes a lot of sense for the people at Dalna. Now they have this faith in distrust of the Jedi, distrust of the Republic, that makes them become a little bit more isolationist in their nature because they don't want to be hurt again. However, I think this also makes them vulnerable to this sort of situation because they will not speak up when there's an issue. And I think like the ultimate answer here between the Jedi and the Republic and the Dolmens is proper communication about culture and understanding. But like I understand where that's complicated when there's a billion planets and also a billion cultures and, you know, all these different things. So I think the hint we get about this event is very interesting and absolutely leaves the door open to exploring what happened in further detail. And whatever it is, it's probably pretty awful. And we're probably going to be like, oh my God, Jedi / Republic, you did a real bad. And I would be fascinated to see it happen in a book or, you know, within the High Republic. And you are probably right that it will.
Yeah. And I think it's also possibly a lesson of cooperation makes us stronger because, again, we don't know the situation. I think there's probably blame to be put on both sides of the battle, you know, between the Dolmens and the Jedi. And I'm curious if it is explored what did happen. Right. And we know that Justina's next book is called Path of Deceit, and she's co-writing it with Tessa Gratton. So part of me thinks, well, maybe we're going to see the deceit, the lie, the tomfoolery, right? You know, maybe the signal that went out to the Jedi asking for help was not from Dalna. Maybe it was from a third party in order to cause chaos and cause confusion and cause the rift and set up the future for this sort of thing to happen, right? Weaken the galaxy on the outskirts, like create distrust. And it's very possible that this YA book could explore that. And I think it will. And you and I, to all listeners, we've made a bet. We have made a bet. An actual real bet with actual real $10 involved. Yeah. Yes. So if if Path of Deceit, we decided, is either an A plot or a B plot of the Dalnan Jedi conflict, Sarah owes me $10. Yeah. I owe you $10. Yes. If it is not about the Dalnan Jedi conflict, Brad owes me $10. Yes. Now, because we are saying this before Celebration, Brad has given me an out to this deal. One out. If I'm sitting there before the publishing panel going, shaking in my boots, worried that I'm going to be proven wrong in that moment, he will allow me to get out of this one. However, we might stick it all the way through here and stick it out all the way through and see what happens with this book. Once that panel starts, you're locked in. You'll know by Celebration or after Celebration whether I'm in or out. We'll probably also have a little bit more information about the books in general too. So you'll know. And I may or may not be handing Brad $10 in May, or I may or may not be handing Brad $10 in October / November. We will see. We're going to be at Celebration, and Justina and Tessa are going to be on stage, and they're going to be like, well, our book is called The Path of Deceit, and it's all about the Dalnan conflict. Everybody's going to look at Sarah, like, who had just swore out loud, and, you know, see her handing me $10 in the front row, because we're going to be shills and we're going to camp out so we can be in the front. So I really love how you have exclaimed my reaction as opposed to like, or literally anything else. It's like Sarah swears out loud in public. And the cover is going to be Dalna. No, it's literally going to be Dalna, the planet, and it's going to say Dalna with a big sign and big neon letters, point like an arrow pointing at the planet. Yeah. Dalna. Artwork not final. So you guys, thank you so much for joining me in the journey of this bet. I'm probably going to put on the clown makeup sooner rather than later, but we will see. Maybe Brad will put on the clown makeup, because I have to tell you, he is very, very confident. Maybe we can have our Friends of the Force meet up after that panel, so everybody who attends can be like, hey, did you get your $10? Who got the $10? Yeah. And we can update everybody. And they can point and laugh at me. Yeah, and then I'll use that $10 to buy everybody Denny's. So it all is part of the plan. It's all part of the plan. Round of bacon on me. You shouldn't promise that. Who wants a scrambled egg? Our listeners are very lovely people, and but if a lot of them show up to this Denny's thing, I don't know if we have the money to pay for everybody's Denny. We would have to split that side of bacon into like 1/16. One side of bacon for the whole table. Yeah, that's 3 strips of bacon. Oh, it's okay. We're gonna cut it in 4s. We're gonna cut it in 8s. You know. Oh boy. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. But
yeah,
I actually
the big money bet. So 10 whole dollar.
Yeah. Yeah. I to be honest though, like all bets aside, I actually really do like, do you want this to be explored? Like, do you want the storyline? Do you want to see what happened and all the distrust that was created? Because I feel like there's really an interesting story here, especially when you think about the Republic's colonialization and how they're expanding into the Republic. And if we view this alongside the Republic also expanding into Togruta territory at the exact same time, and the Togrutas are distrustful of the Republic and want their own territory guarded. It's like, how are each of these planets reacting to the encroachment of the Republic? And so I think it could really nicely fit into this whole theme, especially in the wake of a disaster, when like that encroachment actually causes the death of many people on that planet. You know, there's like a really big tragedy that happens.
Because the more we talk about it, the more layers I feel this conflict gets. And I'm like, oh, but maybe people lay this other layer, and that seems really interesting too. So yeah, I don't know. All very interesting, I think.
Yeah. Well, time will tell. And so will my wallet. All right. Let's move on now to our sort of final section, which is Imri and Vernestra, master and apprentice, right? So we have this really awesome relationship that is now expanded upon from a test of courage, where we leave off and Imri has his new master after almost succumbing to the dark side, which I still think is like a highlight of the High Republic. What he goes through in that book and how he snaps out of it, I think is really, really just good stuff.
Yeah.
And we have some also like interesting Jedi philosophies, like Jedi questions that come along with that relationship, and how they each have their own set of feelings and like about their place in the galaxy, and like what it means as the Order starts to face new threats, and how they continue to have to fight for their lives, even as kids, right? And so it creates this sort of dilemma of like, what am I supposed to be feeling, and what should I be putting my energy into, and what does it mean to feel attachment to those who are not safe anymore, because this is a dangerous galaxy, and how do I cope with that? And I'm taught that there's no attachment, there shouldn't be attachment, but I worry for my friends who could die at any day, right? So there's a lot going on between these two characters, and I think we could start with Vern. She's a character who obviously is very young, was like one of the youngest knighted in centuries, maybe the youngest knighted in 150 years, who knows?
Okay.
Who knows? I'd actually think that might be accurate, but she's sort of wondering, like right in the beginning of the book, like what would past Vern think of present day Vern? You know, the Vern of the past would be communing with the Force and focusing on meditation, and the Vern of today is fighting all the time. Like, would this old Vern be disappointed in who she sees today and who she knows she becomes? And Imri's sort of asking like a similar question, but more in like a broader sense. When during a dinner, Nyla and Vern are talking about the Order's responsibility to the Republic, and it's a conversation that makes Imri very uncomfortable, but it says, quote, as a Padawan, he didn't think he should have an opinion on the matter, but the truth was that he didn't like the idea of so much fighting. Lightsabers should only be used for defense, a principle both Vernestra and Master Douglas had stated repeatedly. But where was the line between defense and offense? And where was the balance between protecting life and taking it? Because that was the easy thing to do. Imri didn't know, and every time the conversation came up, more and more since the Jedi had mostly defeated the Nihil, his face grew hot and he had a feeling he could only describe as spiky and disconcerting. What do you make of this conversation and like, you know, Vern questioning how she would think of herself, and Imri being like, what is the Jedi's place in the galaxy, and like, what do we owe the Republic when it comes to fighting a war that we maybe didn't really sign up for?
I think that this is a really complicated position for both Vern and for Imri to be in, because they're still both so young. You know, we know that Vernestra is young. She, as you mentioned, is one of the youngest knights in a very long time. And she immediately takes on a Padawan. She's barely a person herself, and yet she is tasked with training this other person. And, you know, in a test of courage, we do like see some of her wrestling with that. And throughout phase one, we see her wrestling with that and what it means to be like a teacher and a person who is still learning. And I think that both of them perhaps suffer from that just a little bit. And I don't think that's either of their faults. However, because they're just a couple years off in age, they don't have the world experience of having to deal with something like this before. You know, everything comes and goes, cycles repeat in our world. You know, we do not learn the lessons of the past, so we repeat them. And neither Vernestra nor Imri have had the, and I hate to say opportunity because it's not like these things should be happening or like ought to happen or are inevitable, but they haven't had the, I guess I will say opportunity to deal with this and get out of it on the other side. So they're both kind of having these parallel experiences, even though they're kind of attacking them from different angles. So for Vernestra, like I really understand her point of view because she's like, everything has changed so dramatically and so have I. And would old me know who I am today? Would I see myself in a mirror and recognize myself? And I think that's like a complicated question to have because like the events of the world do change each and every one of us. I think we can probably both say that over the past 2 years and maybe say that for other key moments in our lives. But she's kind of wrestling with her identity in this space and what it means to be a Jedi during this time in this space, because she also, you know, wants to look out for her friends and be responsible for them. But that also means, you know, going into action more, which is not something she sees as herself. And then for Imri, you know, he feels like he's in this position where he's too young and too old and not experienced enough. But of course he's experienced enough because look at what just happened to him. And so he feels conflicted opinions about and conflicted about what it means to be a person in this time and what it means to navigate a war that he's been thrown into as a child. And so I think it's very interesting. I hate that I'm saying the word interesting all the time. And because I feel like I'm saying nothing, but like it's, I think it speaks to many different people's experiences today of the world around them, no matter what they've gone through, you know, whether it's COVID or COVID plus war or COVID plus, you know, something else in their lives in the past 2 years where it's like, okay, you've been thrown into this world and you're having to navigate a new set of rules that haven't been fully defined yet. And I think the thing about this new world is that the rules are always changing because the situation is always changing. Yet Vernestra is also not old enough to understand that the rules are always changing and therefore guide Imri through that. And so I think they're in a position where both of them do lose out a little bit at the wisdom of the typical master-Padawan relationship, that where, you know, the master is typically a generation older than the Padawan and has gone through some of these same emotional things and came out on the other side. And it's tough. And there's this other quote where it says, sometimes she, Vernestra, wished she could be irrational, but that went against every single bit of her training. Being a Jedi was hard. And I think it's an interesting quote because it's like patience is a good thing, but at the same time, like she's still a young person. Like she never got the opportunity to like make bad decisions and learn from them. She's always been on this very particular path. As I've been saying here, where she hasn't like done a stupid thing or gone through something terrible and then lived to see the other side of it and learn the lessons of it. So I think she's in a complicated position with her own growth as a person.
Mm-hmm. Patience is so key to this book too, because they're exercising a lot of it, right? Their friend Avon is missing. She's kidnapped and all they want to do is rescue her. But they both understand at the same time that they can't play favorites and that a Jedi's duty is to protect all people, not just the people they like the most, right? And Avon shouldn't get special treatment just because she's a senator's daughter or she's their friend that they've worked with before. Like, even though they're both itching to find her and they want to do it right away, they got to be patient and they got to do the right things to get there, right? It's all about the path, not necessarily the result. And so even at one point, Vern wonders, you know, quote, "This wasn't the all-consuming focus of attachment that the Order had so often warned Padawans about. Avon was her best friend, and more than that, she had once been Vernestra's charge. She still felt a measure of responsibility for the girl. Vernestra would feel the same way if something were happening to Imri. It was only natural to worry and care about others, but she had to be mindful it did not dominate her thoughts." And so it's like you can feel that impatience, you can feel that irrationality sort of bubbling to the surface, but you just can't let it overflow. And those are natural emotions to feel for both of them, I think. And this book is a testament to how they contain those emotions and how they balance them with the rest of whatever else they're feeling, as well as being true to their duties and their responsibilities as Jedi. And so it's a tough line to walk, you know? What happens when your best friend has been kidnapped and you can't really do much about it at that exact moment?
I also think this is really interesting when you compare it to the parallel experiences that Comac Vitus and Cantam Sai have towards the end of Midnight Horizon, because they both experience this situation where they know that things are happening to people that they love on Starlight Beacon, and they know they're kind of powerless to do anything in that moment, and yet Comac wants to run to Orla to do what he can to help her and help the people of Starlight Beacon, and Cantam Sai knows that in this moment where they're needed, where they can do the most good, is on Corellia, and that's a really complicated situation for both of them to navigate. And like, that doesn't change with age. And I think that's something very interesting, is like, we all have these impulses to be irrational. We all have these these desires to help the ones we love the most. But sometimes the only thing we can do is be present in the moment and help the people in our direct vicinity, like physically around us. Or, I think that it's interesting that two different kind of sets of people are going through this experience as it relates to the events of the Fallen Star or thereabouts.
It speaks to so much of the brilliance and the consistency of this initiative, is like how all these characters are experiencing pretty much the same emotions, despite their age or despite their experience, right? I mean, it's not about what level of Jedi knighthood or mastery that you have. It's about being human. You know, it's about being a living being that has all these emotions and has these complexities to us. And it's not always a straight line. And the Jedi is all about straight lines. It's about this. There is this. There is not this. There is not this. There is this. You know, that's the Jedi code. And we're living in an era of the High Republic where it's like there's a lot of gray area. All these Jedi feel that gray area all of the time. And how do you... is it okay to be in that gray area, or should you be in the black or white? Right. So like, where do you go? Like, where do you sort of drift your emotions as you navigate that path? That's sort of like fundamental to these stories. And I love how there's poetry. It rhymes. It rhymes.
And I think the constant negotiation of their identity, as the rules change in this conflict, is very relevant to what readers are dealing with as well, whether they be of the middle grade age and are just dealing with their identity as a person in the world as they grow and change and navigate complicated social situations, or whether you're an adult in the world reading this book or reading these books and recognizing that each of us is negotiating our own identities within the world at large, and how we can be a responsible citizen to that world.
So one final point on their relationship, I think it's just so great. Like, all serious thoughts aside, these two characters are really meant for each other with this teacher-student partnership. I think they work well together because they are somewhat feeling some of the same things. And I really like how they work off each other. And something in Test of Courage that I loved about their relationship was how, if you remember, like, Vernestra let Imri sort of figure things out on his own. She didn't always give him the answers, right? And you continue to see that here. At one point, Imri remembers Vernestra's lesson of don't let your worry take hold of you, accept it and let it wash over you and propel you into action. And I think it's that important lesson that leads to this moment of triumph at the end, where Imri comes up with the idea to bring Starlight to Dalna and to rescue everybody on Dalna. And it's a moment of pride for Vernestra, to kind of feel that like all those things came together for him, right? Like, all those lessons finally added up to this point. And it was just amazing. And even Emery's like, I know, as Vernestra has told me in the past, we're at our best when we're helping others. And so it was really just kind of this cool culmination of that partnership, and how they are kind of simultaneously friends who really trust each other, but also they're teaching each other really important things. It's not just a one-way relationship.
That's true.
And I especially love, too, when it says Vernestra wrote, Jedi Knight, Master to Padawan Imri Kantaros needed a nap. And I was like, gosh, so true.
Despite her being a completely exceptional sort of young Jedi, she is just like us normal people. You know? She really is quite the relatable young lady. I too need a nap.
But you see so much growth with these characters, and Imri's mastering his empath abilities through some of the meditations Vernestra recommended, and at the same time, Vernestra is making him very tranquil, making him feel very calm. And there's even a little bit of insecurity on Vernestra's side. She feels like she wishes she could be as brave as Imri, who Imri doesn't really push away some of what he's feeling. He sort of embraces it and accepts it and goes with it and tries to figure out a way around it, right? And Vernestra is dealing with a lot at the moment, being a master, but also having these visions even beyond hyperspace, right? She's having them in random places while they're training. And so I wonder how maybe what she taught Imri can now be flipped around for Imri to teach Vernestra. And we won't see that probably until phase 3, but I think that is something to look out for with these two characters. Is like, how does the once I was the learner, but now I am the master, right? So maybe Imri is going to teach her something about herself.
I love how I was talking about the ways that their relationship maybe acts as a detriment to their emotional growth. And I love how you turned it around and were like, actually, while that might be true, these characters also really, because they're so close in age, get to bond in a much different way than the typical pastor and Padawan relationship and allow themselves to grow together. And I think that's a really great framing of it. And I appreciate you kind of bringing up the strengths of a sort of relationship like that.
Yeah. I say good things sometimes. It's really great.
You do. I mean, you do. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. I just really appreciate.
You can say it
stop
too.
it.
I am.
No, I'm not. I'm not. I just really appreciate the alternative point of view because, like, I think mine is quite cynical and yours is like really actually tangible and hopeful and good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Look at that. Friends of the Force. At it again. Look at us. All right. Speaking of all things that are good, I think that brings us to our odds and ends of the episode.
All right.
So these are things that we did not quite get to during the episode, but feel it is very important to mention nonetheless. And I want to start with this quotable. It's from Imri, and he thinks to himself, balance in all things was important, but where did cruelty fit into that structure? Nowhere, as far as he was concerned. And it made me think
Speak it, Imri Kantaros.
Yeah, say it like it is. It made me think of how some people say, everything happens for a reason. And it's like, really? You can think of like the worst thing. You're like, what was the reason for that? Right. And so this kind of feels like the mode of thinking for Imri as well. Is like, really, does everything happen as the Force wills it? Why would the Force will some of these like horrible, horrible things to be happening? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting question to ask for sure. So
I just think that's a really thoughtful, thing to say as well, because it really then hits back to our conversation about slavery and indentured servitude. Where does this have a place in the Republic? Is this balance? Absolutely not. Is Imri's answer, and I think that his like very definitive outlook on the idea of cruelty and within balance is really, really valuable, because I think that maybe some other people in the Order might even disagree with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
My big odds and ends is J6 as a character, an incredible, lovely droid. J6 in this one gets like a blaster upgrade and has a lot of blasters and gets like a dialogue upgrade, so they're sassier and all that good stuff. Also wants the joba oil. And I love that she's like, hey, I want the joba oil. Can you like at least bring me back the joba oil? And then they totally forget the joba oil. Failure on the human's part. But at the same time, she's on the ship scanning like every single possible airwave to listen to Avon, and very like obsessively doing this, partly because of her programming as like a babysitting sort of droid and a maid droid, but also because she knows that Avon will reach out. And again, this consistent confidence in Avon and her abilities and in her skills from the people around her is the sort of validation that I think every young woman needs in her life. So I really do love to see it from the other characters in the story towards Avon.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of Avon, my next odds and ends is the fact that she started to study a lot of Nihil lore. She got to know how the Nihil were organized into tempests and storms and etc. And she also read some rumors about a gravity well projector, which we know from Out of the Shadows that Chancey Yarrow is building. And she builds it. And Marcion Rowe puts it on full display in Eye of the Storm. And in Eye of the Storm, back on Coruscant, after they find out that this thing is happening and they don't know how to stop it, they say, let's call in Kevin Tarr. And so here I am thinking, you know what? Avon is laughing about the idea of a gravity well projector because she's like, that couldn't happen. That's not a thing that could happen, right? And it is a thing that is happening, right? And so I think for her to laugh at a thing indicates that she knows a thing well. And to me, that maybe makes me think, what if Avon Starros and Kevin Tarr put their minds together and they Scooby-Doo this shit, as Doctor Strange would say?
Would love to see it. I think that would be an incredible, incredible team up. I think that we as readers deserve it.
We deserve it. Not need. We deserve it. We are Star Wars fans who deserve.
And yeah, I guess we're just pro STEM here in the Star Wars universe.
Absolutely.
So let's see more of it, please.
Please.
My next odds and ends is something incredibly important. I don't know how this didn't come up in our conversation before, and it is the noodle cart.
Oh, rip. Rest in
peace. The noodle cart on Port Hayleap.
Rip.
Imri looked at the destroyed noodle cart and sighed before holding his hand out and moving it so the cart turned right side up. What could the Nihil have possibly gotten out of destroying a noodle cart? And not just any noodle cart, but the best one in all of Port Hayleap. Coco Noodle had made the spiciest, tangiest noodles, and now Coco was nowhere to be found, and the cart itself was little more than a bunch of twisted metal. A Jedi was not supposed to nurture negative feelings, but Emily really hoped that whoever had destroyed their noodle cart ended up with burrs in their underthings. It's the least they deserved. I love Imri's passion for the delicious noodles. I, too, share a passion for delicious noodles.
Who doesn't?
And it is a dang shame that there are no delicious noodles on Port Hayleap anymore.
Hashtag not the noodles.
Hashtag not the noodles. Oh, not the noodles! Exclamation point. Not the noodles.
Yeah, it's like the guy from Avatar. He's like, my cabbage!
My cabbages!
My noodles!
Yeah. Exactly. It's the same vibe. 100%.
All right, so my next odds and ends here is a George Lucas call out potentially. So you mentioned earlier how Avon was using the board game to put together some pieces to slice open the door since those pieces resembled a locking mechanism. And she organizes these things into 3 piles. Useful, maybe useful, and trash. And it made me think of George Lucas during the prequel trilogy when, they're doing the art concepts for these movies. And he had his 3 stamps, and the stamps were Deep Regret, Okay, and Fabuloso. And it just made me think of that. I don't know if it's on purpose, but it felt very, very specific, like the 3 piles, and they're kind of all very similar. Like, Deep Regret is kind of like trash. Okay is maybe useful, and Fabuloso is useful. So it just, made me think of that. In the spirit of our Attack of the Clones month, it just, prequels on my mind. I felt it.
Yeah. Very important connection you've made here. It's like that one meme from BuzzFeed Unsolved where you're like, I've connected the dots. It's like, you haven't connected shit. I connected them. Like I feel like that, but also you totally might be right. That's what I love about this sort of stuff. I have to mention our new lovely Jedi that I loved to get to know in this book, the Jedi of the Dalnan Temple. We have Lyssa Votz, Nyla Quinn, and Yasek Sparkburn. Yasek is a great cook. Nyla is very wise, and Lyssa is an archivist, and together they are 3 cool Jedi, and we love to see it. We really, really do. And I know we did not touch on their characters really in our main conversation, but just here to give them a lovely shout out because I love learning more about new Jedi, especially Jedi who are not on the typical Jedi path that we have seen in all the movies. I love you, archivist Jedi Lyssa Votz.
Also, Lyssa Votz always forgetting her lightsaber, or kind of
very
quote
iconic.
Unquote forgetting, so she doesn't have to fight.
I forgot my lightsaber.
And then Yasek's like, here it is. She's like, damn it.
She's like, oh, should have put it under the bed last time.
I will say though, Yasek does make a purple steam beans And Vern thinks it's very good, and she does wonder if it's as good as some of Porter's cooking. And I would love to see Jacek Sparkburn and Porter Engel do a cook-off. We've had the Galactic Bake-Off Spectacular. Why not a cook-off? Why not purple steam beans versus 9-egg stew? Would love to see that comic. That's all I'm saying. Continue.
I think that, we've got to have more than just a few Jedi cooks. There's got to be a Jedi cook for every temple. There's got to be some really great Jedi chefs. Somebody's got to make food in the Jedi lunchrooms. You know what I'm saying? So what if we had not just a cook-off, but the equivalent of a celebrity baking show, a celebrity, like a Jedi Hollow reality competition show. And then you can root for your favorite temple cook or whatever. I'm on Team Dalna. Make it a whole multi-season.
I'm down.
Thing.
Yeah. Put it on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Okay. I've got one more. And that is that there is, once again, going back in time for no reason at all, a geological survey that was conducted by the Republic over 2 centuries ago. So it's a longer time ago. Titled Seismic Events and Their Role in Force Confluences. Now, let's look up the definition of confluence, ladies and gents. The junction of two rivers, especially rivers of approximately equal width. You know what? A confluence could also, a similar word to confluence, the coming together of two things like rivers, the process or act of merging. I don't know. There's this book just coming out by Zoraida Cordova, and this is a really crazy coincidence, but it's called Convergence.
Oh, what could it mean?
I'm not saying anything, but I'm also not saying nothing. Thank you.
Okay, so we know that every wave of the High Republic sort of focuses on one planet, one event, one area. Let's just say.
Yeah.
Wave 1 of Phase 2 is all about Dalna. That's the centerpiece.
Okay.
You have Path of Deceit, which is about the betrayal. Then you have Convergence, which maybe there was a forced confluence on Dalna underneath all that volcano.
I'm just saying it's a possibility.
And then whatever quest for the hidden city is, I don't know what that's going to entail, but maybe Dalna also. But I think you're onto something
I can tell
here.
you, Brad, I think I can pretty confidently tell you that there's going to be a quest for a hidden city in Quest for the Hidden City. I know. I'm
sounds
full
right.
of big smart brain particles up here.
Big if true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my final odds and ends here is a quote from Dr. McCampa, and she says, while they're fighting Vernestra, "You have your tricks, but I have science on my side." And my rotting brain that's full of TikToks and Vines immediately thought of the old Vine of that kid who goes, "I got the power of God and anime on my side," and then he just screams. So I thought that was pretty similar, and I would wonder if Justina put in a Vine meme in here, and I'd like to think so. I believe it.
Okay.
I would like to think that's the case. So
I love that for you.
Again, I have TikTok brain rot, so this is all part of that.
I mean, don't we all at the end of the day? Permeates our entire culture. But I think that brings us to, our very, very final segment here, which is what's next. And obviously Phase 2 and Phase 3 are what's next. We know that the Fallen Star is next. But yeah, what's next for these characters, Brad?
I have a couple questions, and mostly, how is Vernestra's visions going to start to come into play? We know that Maria Santeca sort of transferred this ability to her, and whether or not that ability really starts to come through will be seen later on. We know that Vernestra joins Avar's mission to root out Lorna D. We know that Avar comes back to the Starlight Beacon. So my questions are, do Vernestra, do Imri make it out of the Starlight Beacon as it explodes? I hope so. We do see Vernestra in the High Republic number 15. Avar senses her through the Song of the Force. So I don't know. What's going to happen.
That being said, there are people dead on that page. There are dead people on that page.
Although I would like to think people would not die off page. I don't think we would learn oh, by the way, Vernestra died. I don't think that would ever happen. I think if we're going to see a death, we're going to see a death or read about a death. But it's not going to be an offhanded, unceremonious death of hey, by the way, Imri and Vernestra both died aboard the Starlight Beacon, we'd be like, okay, like, you know, at least all the characters who have died thus far, we've seen these circumstances around the death or the death itself.
Sure.
So I don't believe that would happen because that is super disingenuous. I don't think they are that cruel.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I do think it's really interesting that you mentioned her visions because like in this book, they happened outside of hyperspace, which is where they happened before. Does this mean they're more powerful? Does this mean they are having a greater effect on her day-to-day life? Could that be more debilitating for her? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. And yeah, like where are all these characters going to be in the next phase when we see them again? I hope they're all thriving and doing well, but the truth is they're probably not going to be. So ouch.
Ouch indeed. And we have to wait probably a whole year and a half till we find out.
Life is so hard for us right now.
Maybe 2 years, actually. We might not
know. Don't even say that. Don't even say that.
We might not even know till 2024. So
stop it.
But I got to say, Sarah, this is our last book discussion of phase 1.
Sad.
You know, phase 2 comes out October, and
I can't believe how much I've bought into this absolute nonsense of a series. Like, I'm gonna have spent so much money on these diddly darn books. Like, I love them, and like, this is not a complaint, but like, oh my god, they really wrote me in. They really got me.
They really did. I'm really regretful, but not regretful at the same time. My shelf space is like, please stop.
Yeah,
no,
like
Mom.
I bought a bookshelf, I put it all up, and now I have no room on the bookshelf. Like somebody recently said to me, like, "Oh, Sarah, you need another bookshelf." I was like, "How dare you say that?"
I literally just bought another one, and I don't have room.
Did you really?
No, I'm saying that's what you would say to them. Is like,
oh,
they're like, buy another bookshelf. You're like, that's what I did, and it didn't fix anything.
Yeah. And somehow they're both full still.
Well, do you have any parting words for phase 1 of the High Republic before we say goodbye on this podcast until October?
Ouch. Please be less ouch next time.
Yeah.
But also, don't be less ouch next time because, I don't know, I guess I'd live for the pain in this regard. Like, the books have been good. I've been happy. But, you know, my final thoughts for our listeners are like, if you missed any of our book discussions, if you're not totally caught up, they're all in the feed. Come join us on all of our emotional adventures. There's crying involved. So you have a lot to look forward to, really.
Yeah, we have had a couple people who have found our podcast and were like, hey, I was looking for discussions on Fallen Star or Mission to Disasters. Like, if you joined in late in the game, like Sarah said, there's a lot. Author interviews. We talk about other books besides the High Republic. So, and I just want to say too, for everybody who's stuck around, old or new, like, thank you for tuning into our book discussions, our crazy, lengthy book discussions this past year.
Our excessive book discussions.
Like, we never understand the assignment. But, you know, that continued.
Or like, it'll be shorter this time.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, you know. But we're just so grateful to be able to do this on the podcast, and there will be plenty of books to talk about until October. So don't worry, we're not going anywhere. We got Kenobi, we got a Kenobi book, many Kenobi books.
Multiple,
we got Han and Leia's wedding. We got tons of stuff coming up on the podcast. So stay tuned for more. As always, make sure to follow Sarah and I on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads. And Sarah also has her Instagram, Sarah's Puzzled Pages, where she's talking all about books over there, Star Wars and non-Star Wars related. And wherever you're listening, make sure to subscribe to the show so you get our future book discussions right in your podcast feed, and they just pop right in there and you can tune in. And if you have a minute in your day, please leave us a review. Let us know what you like about the show, what you want us to continue doing, what you appreciate. That helps us to get a gauge of what we're doing right. And hopefully we can continue to give you that joy and that entertainment.
Yeah, and we also have a Patreon. So if you'd like to hear more of our comics conversations specifically for the High Republic, we do that on our series called The Force Pull List, which is available at the $2 tier. However, our tier started just $1, and we are so seriously grateful to all of our patrons who help make this show happen. And you guys all mean the world to us, as truly do all our listeners. It's wild that we are able to do this and that people actually like care about what we have to say. So thank you. And a special shout out to our patrons: Amy, Anna, Brian, Carol, Cheryl, Clay, Danny, Deborah, Donnie, Elegy, Huang, Jen, Knights of Ren, Levi, Leanne, Lindsay, Lucy, Neil, Saber Bouquet, Sky Talkers, Travis, T, and our newest patron, Rob. Thank you all so much for financially supporting us. It means the world.
Yes, and thank you all for listening to this episode, this final book discussion of Phase 1 of Star Wars The High Republic. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.